Hi, Erin.
Hello.
Hi, Facebook.
Hello.
Yes, hello, Facebook. Thank you all for joining us for this Talkback. I am so excited to let our Facebook friends in on this conversation. Erin, of course, has been living with this play for longer than I have, but I've been living with the play since the summer of 2019, and it has been an amazing journey, and we're going to talk about it. So, and I also want to shout out DCP, Derby City Playwrights, which is an amazing incubator, an amazing community for our local playwrights. Thank you. Thank you for all you do to nurture new work in our city. So, all right, I'm super excited about this question. We've got a story with 5 characters that are all dealing with grief in their own way, in their own time. How did you, as a storyteller, determine their personalities and what type of grief each was going through? And are any of them based on real people?
It's funny that coming up with characters part is probably the easiest part for me because I do it so often, not just in writing, but honestly, in day-to-day life. This is probably more than I should say. I tend to process information out loud, especially if I'm by myself. And I have conversations with myself, and I'm air quoting because what that really means for me, when I have conversations with myself to process things out loud, that really means, or what that really looks like is like having conversations with people, real or imagined, who are not actually in the room. And so in a way, I tend to create characters all the time. It's like it's a part of my day-to-day world. So that part is just, it just kind of almost happens. And I probably created way more characters. I definitely created way more characters than the ones that ended up staying in the script. So the ones that felt the most genuine and believable and really spoke to me, those are the ones that didn't get cut and then got further developed. As for whether they're based on people in real life, they're not directly based on anyone from real life. I'd say the only character in Good Grief who is mostly based on someone from real life is Poppy, actually. But all the other characters and elements from the story surrounding Poppy are fiction, and the elements of the details about Poppy are also fictionalized. I'd say the characters are more like fictional composite characters, so there's just a little bit of everything in them, trying to put things, they all have some elements from people or experiences from real life.
Will you tell us a little more about Poppy and where his story came from?
Well, Poppy's here. Poppy is has been very excited all weekend about his big debut. And it's okay. This is interesting about the characters and how Poppy came in the show, because Poppy was the last of all the characters to be written. And it was because, and of the people in the group, Lynn was the last character to be written. Is seen as the main character, but was the last character to be written. I lived with the idea of this play of being, people who are dealing with grief and have started this certain kind of grief support group. It all started with that. And I knew there had to be a character who would come into the group that would introduce some sort of different dynamic in the group, that would change the dynamic of the group, and that would be a huge part of the story. But I didn't know who it would be yet. And then at some point it became Lynn. the character of Lynn started to develop. It was like kind of like, what is going to be different about this character's, either about this character, about the reason they're there. I knew that the reason this character was there was going to be not known or understood by the group until well into the play. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know what that thing was. Mm-hmm. And at some point, after I had already started developing the character of Lynn, but did not know what the thing was that she was going to be there to what she was processing. I had a conversation with a friend in real life that had to do with the ways in which some people have strong connections with things other than other humans. And some of the conversations had to do with pets, but then some of the conversations had to do with making connections with what most people would consider to be inanimate objects, something that you wouldn't have a connection with. Although with something like a stuffed animal or an animatronic animal or something like that, those are things that are meant to be. They're meant to have personality. They're meant to help people make connection. I think we tend to in our society think at some point like that's perfectly appropriate for kids, but then it's not appropriate anymore for you to use to make connections with something that's not a person, or at least a living, breathing creature, So in this conversation about that, it suddenly was like, maybe that concept of real versus not real, maybe the thing that Lynn is there to process has something to do with that. So it developed out of a scenario like that. And I felt like that worked. And I asked this person too, I was like, what do you think if I included this thing we're talking about in this play? Told them about it, and then they were fine with it. So,
and this was a person who had that kind of deep relationship with a non-human entity.
Yes,
that's great. I'm seeing in the chat a message that says, "Everyone loves Poppy." Everyone loves Poppy.
To answer part of your other question, I would say that the part about determining what types of grief people were going through in the characters, that part was a little harder. I mean, not like I said, the realizing there were lots of other variations of what this new member of the group was going to be there for. So there were lots of other things that didn't have anything to do with Poppy before I landed on that I tried out and played around with. But the part about like what were all the other people who were already in the group, what were their stories and what types of relationships might be represented, part of it I think took care of itself because of the whole thing about the character development being the easier part for me, is that it felt like just letting them tell it, like just putting them in the group and seeing how they talked about it. That sounds probably a little woo-woo, but I mean, it feels that way. It feels like if you've already got the character development in full stream and it's going, then you can almost get surprised by what they say. So yeah. I'm not good at talking about emotional things as a person. I am not good at talking about emotional things. I'm not, it's not a strong suit of mine. That's why I make art. So it felt easier to create the characters and then sort of give it to them and just write and play around with and imagine them in this group talking to each other. And at some point, they would say things that made sense coming from that character about that thing that might feel more natural, even if it wasn't something I directly had experienced. And right or wrong, that's kind of the way I landed on those decisions.
You carried all of the different stories to the listener so beautifully. And my next question, I want to remember very clearly I think it was maybe August of 2019, maybe September of 2019, sitting in your kitchen and you made me skillet bread and I had just read Good Grief, and it was so clear that Lilith needed to do this show. You know, we had just lost Kathy Ellis, who was one of our artistic sisters, you know, and leaders in our company for so long. And you and I sat there and I said, we want to do the show. And you said we could, which was amazing. And we started talking about actors. And it was really important to both of us. The character of Lynn is neurodivergent. And it was really important to both of us that there be a neurodivergent actor in that role. Can you talk more about that?
Yes, the character of Lynn is neurodivergent. She's autistic, and it's never mentioned in the play that she's autistic or otherwise neurodivergent. It's not directly addressed or referenced in the play. I think it's in the script, but I think it's evident pretty early on that that she's neurodivergent. And for anyone who's not familiar with that term, is that her wiring, her way of processing and interacting with the world is atypical. And it's not directly referenced in there because I didn't find that to be particularly the relevant thing, but it was important to me that the actor who played her, if possible, also be neurodivergent, mostly because of representation. I mean, for one thing, there's no shortage of talented actors, even locally, who are neurodivergent. So it's not like there's no good pools to choose from. So representation and you know, hopefully seeing an actor be able to bring something that is a direct experience and something important to them to a character is something that was interesting to me. But the representation of neurodivergent characters in media is too rare to start with. And when it does happen, all too often it's done with very little input from people who also are neurodivergent. So there are not as many, I don't know of as many situations on like TV and movies where the actors who play the characters, I mean, they're more likely to go for big name actors that, you know, the region has something totally different to do. It's an interesting conversation that I've heard a lot of debate on, because you're acting, you're not, you know, people will say, well, you're acting, you don't have to have a person who is like a character play the character. And I get that part, but I also, for me, it was important because I really wanted the character of Lynn to not be portrayed in a way that that so many neurodivergent characters are portrayed, which is either with stereotypes or simplified or exaggerated traits or something like that. And I think even unintentionally, if someone is not very informed, that even a diligent researcher, you know, even an actor who's doing all the right things to try to figure it out, I think they still would be more likely to come across, you know, there's only the representation that's out there. So you get back to representation. If there's not very much good, accurate, respectful representation out there, then even the stuff that they're choosing from would be harder to sort through. And so knowing, I need to say, you know, before I ramble on anymore, is that Izzy, I could not be happier with Izzy's representation of Lynn. I mean, I just absolutely could not be happier with the job that Izzy has done with this character.
Well, and I want to lift up, and I don't know if Izzy is with us on the Facebook Live or not, but, you know, Izzy has been a part of the Lilith ensemble for a couple of years. This was, you know, they are not new to the ensemble, and how often Izzy reflected what a freedom it was to play a neurodivergent character and to be able to bring all of who they are as an actor to a role and not modify and not not mask, not modify, bring all of who they are.
Yeah, and Izzy mentioned that to me as well, even in just like rehearsals and stuff, that it takes part your energy, if in the context of acting you're having to hold a certain posture. I mean, this would be true of anyone, but to say, oh, these actions of Lynn that are just sort of in the background are sometimes things that are self-regulating anyway. So instead of having to avoid doing them, but to just sort of fall in line with them, that was really good to hear. I felt good knowing that. And I'm not an actor. Again, like I don't know the process of acting, but from everything I understand, it's very much trying to get the internal part of the character, because there's very little that shows up on the page, right? I mean, this is different than reading novels. Yeah. Like you read a script and you have the words, you have the actions, and you have a little bit of notes about other stuff, but you got to kind of fill in the rest. As a writer, that that's its own struggle to try to figure out how to fit that stuff in without trying to tell too much to be director. but to understand not just, what types of movements, what types of speech patterns, what types of whatever it is this character doing, but if the actor is neurodivergent, I feel confident that they're also going to understand the reasons for that, and it won't feel like an add-on, it won't look like an add-on or an afterthought. It will be
authentic.
More authentic, yeah.
And we've got a lot of info coming in the chat.
Let's
I'm gonna go backwards. We've got a message from Cody. Hi, Cody. Cody Clark, fantastic theater artist here in Louisville. Cody says, you're quite right, Erin. We're both laying the groundwork for neurodivergent self-represented theater. That's not a responsibility either of us take lightly. Amen.
So true.
We got JD saying Izzy was so great. Morgan, who played June, says, hey Morgan. And then we've got a couple of questions. Okay. First, what were some of the biggest challenges of transitioning to an online performance? And were there any things that were opened up by that format that were not expected?
Yes.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yes, all of the above. I mean, it was a huge challenge in transitioning, and I don't think any of us knew what we were really getting ourselves into. I mean, we sort of did, but we also kind of didn't. And so it is interesting that at the very beginning discussion, for example, there was, what does it mean to change it where we have to record over Zoom? Will we make this a Zoom support group instead of an in-person support group? And then, very early on going, oh, yeah, I mean, that wouldn't make sense to do because there are too many parts of the script that really involve, it needs to be understood that it's in another room. Like you'd have to adapt way more. And, or how do we safely record the parts that are not happening on Zoom?
Right.
And just all of those things. We might have each had our own idea of what we were getting into, but we had no idea what we were getting into. But everyone stepped up in the most unbelievable ways. I mean, the filming and the choice, and of course, just seeing the product of it is one thing, but the amount of footage, anyone who's ever done filming video work, the amount of footage that is required to get something that's workable, you need this much to get this much, as well as a ton of work to put it in to make it usable and effective. And, the amount of consideration and thought and work and talent and heart, energy that everyone had put into this blows me away.
One of the things we were talking about before the stream started was the monologues of the 5 characters, those 5 moments in time where the characters step out and speak directly to the audience. And as an actor and as a director, one of my favorite things in a black box theater is direct address to the audience. I love that. And I had no idea how that would translate. And we decided pretty early on we would do, all right, record yourself on your phone, talk directly to your phone. And the effect that came across to me, and I don't want to say what anyone else's audience experience was, but when you're in a theater and an actor is doing direct address, they're giving the story to the group of 40, 50, 80 people, and each person gets a little bit of that gift. But in this format, with the actor talking directly to the camera, the audience gets 100% of that gift, of that story, which is intense. And that was something I really did not expect in the virtual version. It was a huge blessing.
I agree. I didn't expect that in that way either. And even having seen the footage, we talked about this too earlier. Once I watched it all in order in the way that it was, which I didn't do until opening night, those monologues were just so much even stronger, the way that they popped out and stood out in between, in the placement that they were. I mean, the actors all did such an amazing job because those are the kind of scenes that really show the work I was able to see, the work that people brought to those characters that was not on the page. There was so much behind all of those that those actors decided.
Yeah.
Those things, because those things were not written down on the page. And there were some things that there were some times where part of a monologue or part of a scene, a line would get delivered and I would be like, yeah, because it would be exactly how I envisioned it. There were other times where it was the opposite, where I would be like, wow, because it would not at all be how I envisioned it, but it would be effective.
Yeah.
And it would be effective because of something that actor brought that I wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah. We have a message in the chat about loving seeing the local places where it was filmed. I'm assuming like the Big Four Bridge, and that they couldn't imagine it as a stage play. Oh, just wait. Just wait. I highly predict that this will be a stage play at some point now.
Watch your mouth.
Yeah. We have another question. Where do you, Erin, want this play to go now?
I don't have any thoughts about where it would go. I am just so thrilled by where it is right now. I'm blown away by the amount of just the way that it has unfolded. It's been such an interesting process, and everyone stepped up to such a degree that I'm still reeling from that.
Me too. Me too. And I'm wondering if we're allowed to curse on a Facebook Live, because all of these expletives keep coming to my head to make it so clear how I really feel about all of this. Just to get deeply honest, the Lilith Ensemble chose this play for our 1920 season because we had just lost Kathy. And it felt like the way for us as an ensemble to deal with that unfathomable unfathomable grief of, somebody that was such an integral part of our working being gone. And then COVID. And then, in this last year, I lost my mother-in-law, and then I lost my father. And the gift that working on this play about unabashed grief has been is incalculable. Morgan says, say it. Yes. Thank you, Morgan. Thank you, Morgan. We've got about 5 minutes left, and I really want to ask Erin this question. All right. So you had said the play is not about Lynn being neurodivergent. It's not a play about neurodivergence. What is it a play about?
Yeah, that whole discussion about representation, that's a part of it. And I think one of the reasons that representation falls so short much of the time is that usually if there's a neurodivergent character, especially a main character, so to speak, in media, it's because the play is about that, or the show, the TV show, or the movie, or whatever. It's because it's about that. And so it ends up being we need to cram all the things in about, it's because the show is about that very thing. So having a character that can just be who she is, while dealing with an actual different theme is something I wish that there were more of in media. But the play, it's about grief. I think it has more to do with what all these characters and people in general have in common than it is about the differences. The differences are there to bring that out, but I think it has more to do with what we have in common and the fact that grief itself is a huge part of what we have in common. We all experience it in different ways, but we experience it ongoing and over, and it's not we do it wrong, so to speak. Mm-hmm. We do things that we regret when we're in grief. We do and say things that we feel bad about. If we're accompanying someone else who is going through grief, we do and say things wrong and things that we feel bad about.
Yeah.
It's a tricky navigation no matter which part of it you're in. And it's not like there's some other shore that you get to where then you're like, oh, okay, I'm done with that. Like that's not the way it works. It doesn't work that way. You can want it to work that way, but it doesn't. I liked that it was on the water. I loved that the filming part got to actually have filming at the water, because I think of it as grief as being very much in the water. It's a water, it's like an experience of being on some kind of waterway and that you have to navigate, swim or paddle or go under, come back up, whatever. But it's an ongoing part of life.
It's taking you where it's taking you. And I think about the old adage of you never step in the same river twice. It is constantly changing.
True.
Yeah.
So true.
All right. I am going to scan the chat and see if we have other questions or comments. So glad people have joined us for this. This is awesome. Oh, Carol's worried I'm going to Facebook jail for bringing cursing. I don't think I actually did curse though, right? Just referenced it. All right. Yeah. Claire says I'm good to go. Well, we are going to have, hi, Poppy. We are going to have another Talkback next week with the cast and creative team. Of course, Erin is heart and soul of the creative team. The team sort of formed around this beautiful story that Erin was telling. Any final questions for Erin, for me, or for Poppy? Oh, Perry's got a question. All right. Were there closing credits? Yes, Perry. And they ripped my heart out, tore it into bits, and stomped it on the floor. Because the closing credits, Perry, please go back and watch it again. The closing credits show the ensemble in the rehearsal room preparing to do it live, which is just so amazing. And yet, I feel like we did it the right way. In this different format, suddenly it was the right way. And a year later was suddenly the right time. And for those of you that are on this Facebook Live that have seen the show, your link allows you to watch it 2 more times through for the price of your ticket. Please, if you want to watch it through, do share the story with other people. Let other people know that they need to see this, because it is an amazing journey. It's hard, but it's delightful. Any last thoughts, Erin?
I don't think so. I'm just still overwhelmed, but in the best way.
Shh, girl, no doubt. Goodbye, Facebook world. We'll see you next Sunday at 7 o'clock for a Talkback with the creative team.